Rights for all. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, it wasn't until about 1992, when I began my clerkship for Justice Clarence Thomas, that I really began to pay attention to how the media writes about the Supreme Court. So I'm talking about the New York Times and the Washington Post, Time Magazine, Newsweek, etc., television reporters. 90% of them believe that the court rulings were radical and outside the mainstream, unless those rulings affirmed whatever the New York Times and Harvard Law School believed was the right outcome. Understand? So from the death penalty to abortion to criminal justice matters, liberal journalists and politicos insisted that the Supreme Court act as a rubber stamp for their views. So in cases where justices merely applied the facts of the case to the law, well, forget it, of course. That's not the proper understanding of the court's role. The court, properly understood, is a check on both the legislative and the executive branches and on the states where constitutional issues are involved. So when the court today issued its 6-3 ruling striking down New York's very restrictive concealed carry law, the reaction from the press and the assorted Democrats, it was textbook.
The Supreme Court decision is going to call into question pretty much every piece of gun restriction across the country.
What the conservatives on the Supreme Court are saying is we want the Second Amendment to be a first-class right like the First Amendment. And we want to be able to carry guns anywhere, anytime, without any sort of regulation by the government.
The problem here is so many people get hit by these guns. When you read the news headlines every day of children crossing the street, people that were doing nothing because everyone decided to be a good guy with a gun.
Of course, the idea that if you're in Times Square, amidst all the hubbub and human reaction and potential gangs and so forth and so on, that people can be easily carrying around concealed weapons. That's just startling. We have a Supreme Court that is out of touch with modern day realities.
David Gergen, wrong. Wait, wrong. Okay, Justice Thomas, in writing the majority opinion, he interpreted the Second Amendment in the only way that makes sense, writing that the constitutional right to bear arms in public for self-defense is not a second-class right subject to an entirely different body of rules than the other Bill of Rights guarantees. We know of no other constitutional right that an individual may exercise only after demonstrating to government officers some special need. Well, that's not how the First Amendment works. It's not how the Sixth Amendment works. It's not how the Second Amendment works when it comes to the public carry for self-defense. New York's proper cause requirement violates the 14th Amendment in that it prevents law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their right to keep and bear arms. Of course, as usual, my old boss is 100% correct. Every other right in the Bill of Rights is read to limit the government's power to restrict it. The 10 Amendments were written by the framers to protect us from a corrupt, oppressive government. Of course, the founders knew what it was like to live under tyranny, and therefore the people's right to bear arms, to them, was key to maintaining a free country. Makes sense. Of course, left-wingers, though, in the government across the United States, they despise the Constitution, which means they're enraged over this ruling.
This decision isn't just reckless, it's reprehensible. The insanity of the gun culture that has now possessed everyone all the way up to even to the Supreme Court.
And we cannot allow New York to become the wild, wild west. We will not allow our city to live in fear that everyone around us is armed and that any altercation could evolve into a shootout.
It's devastating. I mean, it's just fundamentally devastating. The proliferation of illegal guns is a challenge of our time, and we have got to rise up as a country.
Yeah, Lightfoot, because your streets are so safe, right? Now, every day these same people betray the rule of law in their own cities and states because whether it's Lori Lightfoot or Hochul or Adams, they're content to leave their own law-abiding citizens defenseless and make the job of law enforcement at the same time more difficult pretty much at every turn. So for the regular person out there, the workaday person, it's a lose-lose proposition. But the elites, they always protect each other. celebrities, and other special people were the only ones New York believed had the meaningful Second Amendment right to carry a concealed weapon. Now, back in 2010, a list of New York City concealed carry permit holders was obtained by the New York Daily News. People like Mark Antony, shock jock Howard Stern, Robert De Niro, Donald Trump, his son Donald Jr., Mets third baseman David Wright, and even Martha Stewart's daughter, radio host Alexis Stewart, all were authorized to carry a weapon concealed in the city. Now, John Schuyler Chambers, a lawyer who's helped a lot of New Yorkers get these gun permits for more than two decades now, said that they can get their own security, but with the internet, it's much easier to find people. They don't want to find someone on their lawn at 5 in the morning. Okay, from just that comment, we see the absurdity in this New York law. Democrats, as usual, cater to the elites because they're the only ones who have a legitimate concern about an intruder showing up at their homes or threatening them in public. Well, and another reason you know the 6-3 court was right is by the silliness of the dissent. In it, Justice Breyer, of course, who's retiring, rather than addressing the plain language and the historical circumstances that inform the words of the Second Amendment, he discussed gun suicides and listed the well-known mass shootings in America like Uvalde, Buffalo, Orlando, Newton, Dayton, and of course, he talked about all the horrors of that. Well, Alito, Justice Alito, who is in the majority, wrote separately in a concurrence, he slapped back at Justice Breyer, saying, why does the dissent think it's relevant to recount the mass shootings that have occurred in recent years? Does the dissent think that laws like New York's prevent or deter such atrocities? Will a person bent on carrying out a mass shooting be stopped if he knows that it is illegal to carry a handgun outside the home? And how does the dissent account for the fact that one of the mass shootings near the top of its list took place in Buffalo? The New York law at issue in this case obviously did not stop that perpetrator. I don't know, that's a heck of a retirement send-off for Breyer, isn't it? Now, another obvious reason you know the court got it right, reactions from some of the most unhinged personalities out there, like former sports guy Keith Olbermann, who tweeted that the ruling shows that the court should be dissolved and advises that states just ignore the ruling. Now, that's a neat trick. Just ignore the court. Remember, these are the same people who are constantly warning about how, under Republicans, democracy is at risk. Democracy is in peril. I don't know. Call me crazy, but I think that Olbermann should just stick to memorabilia collecting because he's actually really good at that. Of course, this is how it always works, though, with these people. When they don't get their way, they want to tear down the entire system. In other words, abolish the Electoral College, burn city blocks, tear down statues, and pack the court. No, forget packing the court. Just dissolve it altogether now. That's where we've come. This is sheer lunacy. It's anti-constitutional. It's anti-American. So in the end, this is not a radical decision. It's not a crazy decision. It's a long overdue decision. And contrary to all the caterwauling out there on the left, the ruling doesn't even mean that states have no power to regulate guns. It just can't prohibit law-abiding residents from carrying a gun for self-defense. As Justice Alito noted, that's all we decide. Our holding decides nothing about who may lawfully possess a firearm or the requirements that must be met to buy a gun, nor does it decide anything about the kinds of weapons that people may possess. Nor have we disturbed anything that we said in Heller or McDonald versus Chicago about restrictions that may be imposed on the possession or carrying of guns. Get it? But the modern American left, they don't like you, okay? They despise you. You have to understand this. And they do not want the regular, ordinary people to be free to defend themselves and their families. Now, why? Why don't they want that? Because they want you dependent, they want you scared, they want you groveling for whatever scraps they decide to throw at you. They'd abolish the Second Amendment in a heartbeat if they could. and frankly, the entire Constitution for that matter. But thankfully, our founders were very wise. They saw how power corrupted otherwise sensible men and how important it was to leave behind a document that would protect all the people, not just the upper crust, against the abuse. And thankfully, we have 6 justices on the court who honored the plain language of the text and the intent of the framers. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.